feel okay with that?
Felt good, man. You
No,
do all
no,
the work, so felt great from my perspective.
cool. No retakes then.
Yeah, no, I feel great. I didn't swear, you know.
That's a good one. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. I'm very excited today to start a new series with the CNCF about the CNCF landscape. So we're going to be going through lots of detail around that. This is going to be the first video, which is kind of going to be really like an intro to the landscape. What's it all about and how does it kind of work and things like that. And we'll kind of get into some of the categories of the landscape and things like that. And here to cover it all with us is Jason Morgan. How are you doing, Jason?
Well, thanks. How about you?
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for coming on and agreeing to do this. I really appreciate that. Jason, just kind of want to start with an intro to yourself, please, and then Buoyant, which is the company that you work for.
Yeah, well, so I'm a technical evangelist at Buoyant, and I say that it's a title that just kind of made up because developer relations didn't quite make sense, as Buoyant is largely focused on platform operators and how we can make their lives easier. So yeah, that's me. And then Buoyant is a company that makes the Linkerd service mesh. So it's a CNCF project that just recently hit graduated status back in July, so maybe not that recently anymore. And yeah, that's what I've got.
Excellent. Okay, and you're obviously kind of do lots of work with the CNCF. So just and again, sort of a single line of sort of intro to the CNCF.
Yeah, so the CNCF is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They're the folks that host the Kubernetes project. So it's a fairly neutral foundation that was created to hold a bunch of projects related to how are we going to deliver applications in this new microservices world, and how are we going to host the technologies that make that work.
Fabulous. Okay, so just moving on to the landscape. So as we said, we'll kind of do a quick summary of the CNCF landscape for all the projects today. So a quick introduction to that. What's kind of the what is the landscape, and what does it kind of do? Why is it there, and so on?
Yeah, so the Cloud Native Landscape it's an interactive document. I think it's called the Cloud Native Interactive Landscape, right? It's open source, so you can go in and look at what's in there. If you go to the landscape.cncf.io, you'll see a picture. There's a bunch of links on there. It's interactive, so you can click on stuff and move your way around. But what's there is to try and give folks a sense of the tools, whether they're open source, whether they're CNCF projects, or whether they're commercial projects that are in this cloud native space, and give a sense of some perspective for how well adopted they are, or the market cap for the company behind them, or whatever that may be, and
right.
Make it easier to look them up.
Sure. Excellent. And obviously the landscape itself is quite extensive, so it's made sense to obviously put the projects into certain categories. So can you just go through, kind of list out the categories and just briefly say what they mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously there's a bunch, right? I look at it, when I look at the landscape, I look at it as like a layer cake kind of thing. You have your foundational layers, and then you've got like the icing or the cross-cutting concerns. So weird analogy. I'm hungry, so that's probably where that came from. But let's just talk about it, right? So when you look at the main page, you're going to see 5 layers, right? The bottom one is special, which I'm really not going to talk about at all. Then above that, you have provisioning, right? Which I think of as like that foundational layer. How am I going to get my VMs or bare metal or whatever? How am I going to get the compute environment spun up? Then container registry, right? Like how are we going to, or, the things that I need for getting it spun up, and then getting things secure and the tooling distributed in that space. Go above that, you've got the runtime, right? And when they say runtime, they really mean like container runtime stuff. The foundational tooling you have for when you're doing stuff that is containerized or is similar enough to containerization that you can't necessarily tell the difference at a glance. That's where you have storage, the actual executor and your networking. Beyond that, orchestration management. This is where we start to get into like, because if you're listening, you probably know about Kubernetes, right? But before Kubernetes, there were other tools. And even today, there are other tools for scheduling containers across machines. So things like Docker Swarm, Mesos, Nomad. There's a bunch of others, and nothing's being omitted because it's bad. I just can't think of it off the top of my head. But that's where you find Kubernetes, which is the big thing behind the CNCF in the first place. And then you see all the other foundational things for your containers to talk to each other in an effective way, including that's where you find Service Mesh, where the Linkerd project lives. Okay. Above that, sorry, last one in the stack, application definition development. Am I going to store data? Am I going to build my apps? Am I going to deploy them to Kubernetes? Am I going to like have them interact with each other? And then what's my like delivery and CI side going to look like? So those are the layers of your cake. And then on the outside, you've got two things: so platform and observability analysis. This is where you have the tools for how am I going to get this stack made into something useful, and then how am I going to actually make it reliable, ensure that we're delivering stuff that's like good and also works.
Right.
So that's the very top level intro to these things.
Cool. Yeah. So obviously, I mean, as we said, there's a number of projects in each of those categories. So it's kind of made sense for you guys to the CNCF to kind of put those into those categories. Now, recently at the kubecon North America 2021, there was a enhancement to the landscape. So could you want to kind of just mention that very briefly?
Yeah. So my colleague Catherine Paganini she's really been the impetus for a lot of changes, in the CNCF. And when we talk about the business value subcommittee, that's really due to her leadership and her drive, right? But what she did is she started on this article series now almost 2 years ago, where we looked at this cloud native landscape that at the time, like a lot of folks were making fun of it, right? Because like you look at it and there's just so much going on. I used to be in sales, and like when I was trying to sell people my package thing, I'd be like, look at this landscape. Do you want to choose through this, or do you want someone to curate it for you? Because there's just so much happening here. But anyway, her response was, instead of making fun, let's make it easier. And so she started writing a guide, and then got me to help her with it, where she broke down layer by layer. What does this do? What's how do you understand it in like a human friendly way, right? Imagine you're not someone that's deeply indoctrinated in Kubernetes and the cloud native space. Like, how do you make sense of it? And so she started writing this article series. We eventually turned it into this guide with the help of a bunch of folks, including the CNCF cartographs group. It's a neat group that's responsible for the new book that came out from the CNCF. Like, seen those Fippy books. I'm rambling a little bit. Sorry, let me get focused. It's a guide. It looks at this landscape and it explains it all in plain language. Right. If you actually go to landscape page, there's a toggle where you can view from landscape to guide, and it will take through each section, tell you what it is, how does the tooling in that space help, and what's the problem space that the tooling is meant to address. And then it'll also do like a bit of a technical introduction to that particular category, give you some buzzwords so that when you hear someone say infrastructure as code, you can know that they're probably talking about things that live in the automation and configuration group of the provisioning layer. And then it introduces you to all the CNCF projects in that space.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, just going back to your point about sort of, showing the landscape, I certainly use it a lot in my presentations, and I kind of mostly use it to scare people into actually appreciating what's involved in doing all this stuff. So I think that's really, it's kind of, I'll do a screenshot of it and just put a kind of a static page and show that, and just kind of say, you want to do cloud native, this is what you need to do. So you need to be kind of choosing very carefully and planning very carefully. That's kind of the message behind that. Excellent. So so that will be something certainly that we will cover. I think I think that sort of interactive guide is going to be Extremely useful. So that's a really good, sounds like a really fantastic addition. So, so Jason, just kind of moving on to the projects themselves within these categories, how do the actual projects sort of get donated? Give us a sort of an example of that.
So I don't actually know a ton about the CNCF project, right? So I work for a company that did donate something, so Linkerd
Right.
in particular, right? But essentially, you propose to the CNCF guiding committee that you want to add your project as a CNCF project, right? Which means they're going to take some ownership over that code, that open source code.
Right.
You're going to agree to CNCF terms and some things like that, and once you enter the CNCF, your project is now on a ladder, a graduation or really a maturity ladder,
right?
Because that's actually a good one to dive into, because everyone thinks, like, or at least I thought, like, what does it mean to be graduated from the CNCF? Does that mean you're out of it? Like, are you done? Well, so what it is it's a maturity. It's what level of maturity have you hit from the CNCF's perspective, right? So you have sandbox, which is the starting phase. Once a project is donated and accepted in, it comes in as a sandbox project. That means, they've decided that it fits their model, but they're not really telling you how mature it is, right? Because it's early days. As you go beyond that, like the middle tier of adoption readiness is incubating. So that means there's been some validation from the community inside the CNCF to say, yes, this is good. And the steering committee has been like, okay, cool. Like, we're ready to be incubated. And then the final phase is graduated. That is, you've hit the highest tier of maturity that the CNCF has for projects. And you actually see, that's another one that is covered in the landscape guide. But if you go to the landscape and you look at it, you only see highlighted in like bigger squares with different colors, incubating and graduated projects. And you have to click in on any given section to find the sandbox projects, because they're not easily visible. Right, because the CNCF isn't really endorsing them that highly.
Sure. Okay, cool, excellent. And obviously, I mean, the CNCF kind of plays a role throughout the life cycle as those sort of projects, sort of get admitted and then sort of all the way to graduation, so to speak, as well. But as you said, the graduation doesn't mean that they're actually leaving the CNCF. It just means that they've kind of reached that level of maturity.
You've reached the highest tier, and you're going to get the most help that the CNCF is going to offer an open source project.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. And then obviously, again, some customers who, and enterprises kind of in general, who, feel confident enough, they can certainly use the project prior to sort of its maturity, its graduation. But certainly when it's kind of graduated, it's kind of definitely production ready, so to speak.
Well, it is considered, again, it's what the CNCF committees involved have decided hits their highest maturity tier. Does that mean that's what you need to use it yourselves? Like, absolutely not. Like, y'all need, any organization needs to do their own assessment of the risks involved, but it's a pretty good stamp of approval.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, cool. Okay, so parts of kind of some of the stuff that you do as well is around sort of the business values subcommittee. So can you give us a little bit sort of an intro history to that, purpose, things like that?
Yeah. So thanks for asking. So this is another Catherine one, right? So again, right. As we're writing this series, Catherine's like, this should belong to the CNCF. And at the end of the day, like, the CNCF is great for like tech stuff, and there's all sorts of really cool technical conversations going on. But like, what really matters isn't the tech for its own sake. The reason we do cool tech, well, one, either we're like, hey, I just think it's super cool to make, code go fast, like, hooray. Or the reason you're doing is because you're trying to accomplish something in the real world, like outside of tech, right? So the point is, these tools have an impact on your organization, whether it's a business, a government, a nonprofit, right? So they change the way you do the work that you do. And so Catherine, looked at it and was like, we want to do this stuff. And then we want the CNCF to pivot a little bit to telling more stories of how is this technology going to change the way you do business or you do the work that you do. And so it came about as a response to that. So we kicked off, also probably about a year ago, we kicked off the Business Value Subcommittee. If you're listening later, go to the CNCF Slack. There's a marketing business value channel right? And come join us. We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea for ways to articulate the value of CNCF projects, we would love to hear from you. You know, the first thing we started working on in this committee, like we had our initial meetings, and it was fun. We had like 30 folks. And what I realized like really quickly is that a lot of us were using the same words to mean different things. You know, so we didn't have like shared definitions. And like, think about the word observability for a second. I want to be clear, I have no opinion on the proper definition for the word observability, but there are a lot of people that do. Yeah. And if you ask 3 of them, you're likely going to get 3 different definitions. So what we decided to do first off is like, okay, well, before we do anything genuinely useful, we're going to define some terms and use those definitions in a shared way. So another thing that launched the KubeCon was glossary.cncf.io, where we take terms that we're using, right? Like, so whether it's canary release, observability, service discovery, whatever the thing might be, right? We write a definition for it. You can link to the definition. We tried to do that same format that you see in the landscape guide. We say, what is this thing in as plain language as we possibly can? What's it meant? What's the problem it's meant to help with? And then how does it actually address that problem, right? So that as you're looking at it, you can use it. If you're out there and you write about, you know, cloud native stuff, I'd love to hear your opinions on things in the glossary, and I'd love to have you link to terms in there, you know, if you find the definitions useful. So yeah, so the business value subcommittee it's not just the glossary, it's not just the landscape guide. It is a group of folks who are getting together to try and find ways to articulate the value of CNCF projects and cloud native space in general to organizations. And if you have a thing that you think the CNCF should maintain or build, right? I'm telling you, like, I'm not some like special driven person, and I've managed to get 2 things through with the help of someone who is special and driven, 2 things through to be pages on the CNCF, right, that are active now. And if you're interested in getting involved, you can absolutely make a huge impact. And we'd love to have you.
Oh, yeah. So obviously, I mean, it's important to articulate the business benefits of all this. As we said earlier, it's the landscape is quite, you know, extensive. There's lots of stuff going on. Some of the projects are, well, the projects are all sort of different, you know, different sort of, you know, periods of maturation and so on. So it is probably important to, you know, to articulate that aspect of it, so that yes, enterprises can actually take that into account and so on. I like the what you mentioned earlier about the sort of the layered cake approach for the categories. I think that's apart from being an interesting sort of way to put that for you know, if somebody's feeling hungry, it might make them actually feel hungry when they hear that. But certainly a good way to actually kind of again articulate all those categories as well. Yeah, so I think that's kind of all very good, because the business value is always, but you can kind of do all these projects, but it's important to be able to articulate them as well. Okay, so let's move on to the quick view of the landscape, Jason. So please talk us through. This is obviously the kind of the CNCF Cloud Native Interactive Landscape. So just kind of talk us through all of the sections very briefly.
Yeah, no problem. Start with here's the new button, right? Obviously, I'm excited about it because partly my doing, or at least I had a hand in it. So here's the new button. If you click on it, it now takes you to the landscape guide, right? Talking about what it is. This is where you can see it's cartographos, and we had a ton of help from a bunch of folks getting this done. So this is where you can start seeing, you know, everything about the various sections. And with that, we'll go back to the actual landscape itself.
Landscape,
yeah. For every layer in the cake, right, there's a little icon, gets you the information for the whole layer, and then for every category inside of it, there's another little icon that you can click on. So we can pop into provisioning. You see everything from the provisioning perspective. I actually don't like this view a ton, but one thing you do get, which you wouldn't see otherwise, is now you can see the light blue boxes, which are light blue outlines on boxes. These are your cloud native sandbox, or the CNCF sandbox projects.
Right.
Just for other things, the white background on the icon indicates that it's an open source project, not in the CNCF.
Okay.
And the gray background means that it's a closed source or commercial product.
Right. Okay.
Anywho, so the provisioning, right? I can talk about it, or I can just go right to the icon, right? But it's our base layer, or the first layer in the landscape. I don't want to read it off to you. You can see it there, but it's everything about creating and hardening your environment where you're going to start deploying other things. Within that, you've got, because we can keep just hitting links, automation and configuration, right? And you can switch back and forth between them. And this is where we have our tools that allow us to build and configure the actual VM or physical infrastructure that we're going to be working with. And there's a lot there, including, you can get your buzzwords and your CNCF projects to learn a little bit more.
That's fairly, it's a good way to do the summary of each category.
Oh, thanks.
What else is on there?
Yeah, then we also have container registries. So let's actually just go to the picture, because it's a little bit easier to look at from here. You have automation configuration, container registry. So that's the place where you're going to store your containers and your images, however you're using them. Security compliance, all that stuff about how do we actually make sure that we have a secure environment to run in. And then key management, which is another important part of how are you going to distribute the secrets that you are going to use in these environments.
Okay, excellent. And so I mean, obviously each of the categories is presumably growing as well. There are other sort of projects that come in at some point in this, and I assume again those kind of get added in as kind of, as we said, each of the projects could have progresses as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, hold on. Let's go CNCF landscape. So the secret is if you want your stuff in here, go to the CNCF landscape or CNCF/landscape on GitHub and send in a PR, right? And get yourself added to this big YAML document that contains all the projects and some information about them.
Okay. Cool.
But yes, it is constantly growing. It is constantly growing because it's a very active space.
Okay, cool. So obviously in sort of the upcoming parts to the series of talks, we're going to cover each of these categories. We're going to go through maybe one or two of each of the sort of the projects that are in there and just kind of sort of hover over those and discuss those briefly. Certainly kind of want to focus a little bit more on Linkerd in the future. So I think we're probably set up to do a specific talk on Linkerd, you and I, at some point as well. Jason, you up for that?
I'd love it. Yeah, that's actually in my standard job description. So I knew
you were going to say that somehow. Excellent. All right. So yeah, I appreciate that. That sounds like a really good sort of quick intro. Like I said, yeah, sort of the next series of talks that we're going to kind of follow up to this one will be, like I said, focusing on each of those categories and getting into a little bit more detail. Well, Jason, thank you very much for doing this kind of intro talk and running us through the landscape briefly. As we said, we'll cover a lot more detail of that sort of in the upcoming parts of this series of talks. But yeah, I appreciate your time for doing that. Also, I've done another talk with Bill Mulligan. So for viewers, if you're kind of interested in looking at the recent KubeCon Cloud Native Con North America 2021 event, there's another video on the channel, so do check that out. Again, I'll put details of the links and so on in the description of this video. Obviously, the kind of the web links and stuff like that for the CNCF landscape itself, again, I'll add those into the description, so viewers can actually kind of go and have a look at that as well and kind of play around and get interactive with the interactive landscape, so to speak. Okay, and yeah, so part 2 we'll work on that. Jason, I think at some point we'll kind of try and get something done on that, you and I, and then we'll see how we get on with that. But yeah, just leaves me to say so thank you very much for this intro. Really been useful, and I look forward to part 2.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much for watching this talk. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, share, like, and subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.